Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to environmental science and law this time, and trade and wealth too, as we'll see. All right, so we talk about the basics of wealth, what it is, and trade, why trade happens. We transition from that to this idea of pollution and collective action problems, which need collective action solutions. We will look at environmental policy at the international scale and countries working together with this sort of framework, right, for like why they would do that. And then finally, we look at environmental policy in the United States, major laws, how they work, and how it gets to us. 4 sections on this one: wealth and trade, environment and economy, international law, and then law in America. Cool. So let's get to it. First thing is wealth and trade. Here is my list of what wealth looks like. You could make your own. You don't have to agree with me. Okay. 2 most important things in life. Now, if you wanted to, you could talk about, personal characteristics and throw this into the, poetry brain or whatever, right? But we're not going to do that, all right? 2 most important things in life for our purposes are going to relate back to those fundamental human needs, right? Food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, energy, transportation, right? If you could only know one thing or 2 things about a person, right? What would give you the most information about the quality of all those other things, right? The quality of their food, quality of their transportation, energy, all that, right? And it's not my opinion. Statistically, it is true that there's 2 factors at the top of that list, right? Over the course of a person's entire lifetime, cutting across time, space, geography, culture, language, everything, right? The first, whatever you do, do not be born into poverty, right? So probably not a surprise. The first one is don't be born into poverty, no matter what you do. But this is not something that we can necessarily control, right? Unlike the second factor, which is the quality of a person's networks, right? Social networks. And that's not just in terms of, what you see here with like LinkedIn, right, or professional networks, but it's also considering the family as a network, or friends, or family friends, and neighbors, and all of the different connections that we have with other people, right? And this we can control. Over the course of an entire lifetime, those are the 2 most important things. And not because I made it that way, right? So this leads us to this discussion of wealth and what wealth is. Now, there's a lot of ways to define this. For our purposes, we're going to go back to those human needs, right? Food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, energy, transportation, right? Those things going up in terms of quality and abundance and access means that person is getting wealthier and vice versa. And of course, wealth and health cannot really be disentangled. We might like to think that these are completely separate things that have nothing to do with each other, and that's so totally not true, right? We also, for a moment, need to set aside this discussion of money, right? Wealth and money are different. Now, we will eventually get to money a little bit, right? But for now, this idea of money as, money as everything in the world, right, is actually not helpful for us. It actually kind of blinds us to some of the deeper forces at work, right? We'll see how. Okay, so I will teach this to you as it was taught to me. So we've got our desert island in the middle of nowhere, right? And we've got 2 people who have washed up ashore and they're, shipwrecked, right? This one is named Robinson, this one is named Wilson, right? And I put 2 of them on here, but let's just assume to start out with that they are in different places on the island, right? And the island has 2 different sorts of goods, right, that you can harvest, right? It's got coconuts and you've got fish, right, that they are able to access, okay? We'll start off with just this one, right, Robinson. Now, he's going around on the island and trying to do what people have always done, right, since before we were even modern human beings, right? Go into the environment and pull stuff out, pull wealth out of it, pull food out of it, right? And he can either gather 3 coconuts or 2 fish per hour. Works 10 hours per day, it's a nice round number, and he needs at least one of each of these things every day, right? To, stave off scurvy and anemia, or whatever the reason is, right? We don't really care, right? But he's got to have at least one of each of those things, right? And if we wanted to, we could sort of plot out the different possibilities for how we could gather, right? So he could spend, of his 10 hours, 9 of them on coconuts, and then 1 hour on fish, or 9 hours fishing and then 1 hour on coconuts, right? And the balance of this is going to depend on his preferences and wants and needs, right? We're kind of going to say that all of these different production possibilities are available to him to choose from, if that makes sense, right? And which one he chooses is up to him, but it's really important that we see this last one, right? 28.5 coconuts and 1 fish. Why 1 fish? Because he needs at least 1 of each, right? So he spends 9.5 hours gathering coconuts, and then a half hour, the last half hour, gathering fish. And we're just going to kind of remember that that's his production capacity on his own, right? Okay, so Wilson, I don't know, has longer arms, right? So he's better with a spear at throwing it and getting the fish or whatever, but he has to bend over further to get the coconuts, so he's not as good at that, right? So he has the kind of opposite production capability, 3 fish per hour or 2 coconuts per hour, right? And we could go in and plot the exact same thing. Notice this is the same as this list, except fish and coconuts are swapped, right? These are all the different production capabilities that he has, okay? So let's say that these two meet each other, right? What happens? Okay. Let's just assume that, these are both individuals of sound mind who speak the same language, right? And that they don't immediately, think that the other one is hostile or a threat, right? Well, Robinson has this kind of production capacity, right? Wilson has this production capacity. Each works 10 hours a day. Each one needs at least 1 of each. Now that they are together, right, working together, what should they do to maximize the total food that each one of them has? The answer on this one is kind of staring us in the face, right? Answer is going to be to trade with each other, right? So Robinson is better at coconuts, Wilson's better at fishing. They go out and do that 10 hours a day. They trade with each other, right, to get whatever they don't have. And in the end, most important takeaway, each one of them winds up with more than they could get on their own, right? So we could put this into numbers, right? So they could, right, 30 coconuts, 30 fish, and then they just trade with each other 1 for 1. They could do that, right? And then they have 15 coconuts and 15 fish each, right? Versus 15-10 and 10-15 before when they were working on their own. Most importantly, right, is that even if you, slide the scale all the way over to one side or the other, right? Even in the most kind of extreme outcomes here, right? For Robinson, from his standpoint, it's still better to trade, all right? He gets more food, more wealth by trading with someone else. And the same is true for Wilson, right? He winds up with more stuff in the end by trading here. So what's actually happening here is because we have this little trade network, right, little tiny one, both people wind up with more wealth in the end, right? It is mutually beneficial. There is not a loser here in that trade. Both of them wind up better off. Why? Because they can specialize. Okay. We're going to look at one more example, right? So let's say, okay, well, maybe this is a little bit too harsh, but let's say that Wilson gets, injured and twists his ankle whenever he's fishing or whatever, and for a limited time, his production capacity goes way down, right? How does that change things, right? What's different about it now? Maybe this is surprising, or maybe it's not, but even in this scenario, right, where one of them can produce way more than the other, he's just better at everything than Wilson, right? It's still better for them to trade, right? Trade is still mutually beneficial, right? So Robinson goes out and finds coconuts, Wilson goes out and finds fish, and they trade, right? And you could stop for a moment and try to imagine how would that trade look exactly, right? And the answer is sort of staring us in the face again, right? Well, neither one of them is going to trade unless it improves their position, right? It's what rationality means in our context, weighing two things and selecting which one is better. So Wilson here offers a trade. I'll give you 1 fish in exchange for 1 coconut. And that helps Wilson because it takes him a long time to gather coconuts. Does it help Robinson to accept that trade? And the answer is yes, right? For mathematical reasons, all right? You can prove it mathematically. There's no arguing with it, all right? Winds up with more wealth in the end, no matter how you cut it, no matter how you slice it, right? Compared to if he were doing stuff on his own, right? So even though one of them has much more production capacity than the other, trade is still mutually beneficial. It creates wealth because it allows them to specialize, right? Now, there's two terms that we'll have to throw in here, right? So whenever Wilson goes to fish, he gives up the opportunity to go harvest coconuts, right? And we would consider that to be the opportunity cost, right? It's the sort of cost paid by choosing one thing over another, right? So if you go out somewhere, and somebody buys you, I don't know, $10 lunch, but it takes you 4 hours in total, you gave up all the other stuff that you could be doing in those 4 hours, right? If you've heard that phrase, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? That's what it comes from, right? So Wilson actually has a comparative advantage in terms of fishing because he gives up less to fish than Robinson does. And because of that comparative advantage, each one of them can specialize and then trade with each other, right? And as a sort of consequence of this, we can lay down our commandments here in terms of wealth, right? Trade is mutually beneficial, okay? And we're assuming that it doesn't cost them anything to do these trades. Wealth is not a zero-sum game, right? By trading with each other, they create more wealth than they would have on their own, but it can also be destroyed. In other words, there doesn't always have to be a loser, right? When they trade, they both become winners. They are both better off. So even if you imagine these as being the most selfish, greedy pigs of human beings in the entire world, as is sometimes true with human beings, they'll still trade with each other. They don't do it out of the kindness of their heart, even though they may have that. They do it because it is in their best interest for both of them. It creates more stuff for everybody. Now, as a consequence of this, right, we can start to reframe some common, myths, right? One of them, right? Somebody, is just feeling weird, right? Or, just out of their mind, and they're walking by a window, and they just pick up a rock on the ground and throw it through the window for no reason. And you look at them, and you're like, hey, man, what is this? And they say, oh, well, no, hold on. I actually just created more jobs for the window people, right? Now they're going to have to hire more workers. I just added jobs to the economy. As we can see, this is wrong, right? What that person actually did was destroy wealth. If you think about it in terms of jobs, then it sort of distorts the reality of what just happened, which is that wealth, stuff, right, shelter, things that people want, was destroyed. The fact that jobs are added is a distortion of the economic reality of what's actually happening, right? It applies with shopping carts, right? Somebody leaves a shopping cart out and you say, hey, kind of a dick move, right? And they say, oh, no, I'm actually creating jobs because now, the company is going to have to hire more people. Putting the shopping carts back does not actually create wealth. It's something that, is important for the supermarket that they have to do, but it doesn't actually add value. It doesn't actually lead to the creation of wealth. So, no, it's actually bad to do that, right? We can understand why countries trade with each other, right? Why does the US trade with China when we are geopolitical adversaries, right? Why do we trade with our enemies? It's mutually beneficial. Why do we trade with countries, like Madagascar, who has 1/100th of our production capacity? Just like, as we saw in that second example, it's still mutually beneficial. Why does the United States not just launch missiles at all of our enemies, right, and annihilate them? Well, our friends would turn on us is the first reason, and the second is because we benefit from trading with those countries. Money, why does it exist? We're shortcutting the whole discussion here, right? But basically this allows people to trade with each other really easily. It facilitates exchange, right? It facilitates the creation of wealth by letting people trade, but it isn't wealth in and of itself, right? And the final part of it, we can imagine wealth as also being like information, right? Information is wealth. Wealth is information. When people talk to each other, they share information between each other, right? And it doesn't cost them very much to do this, right? To share information we have that others are looking for, and for others to share information they have that we are looking for, right? So talking to each other kind of becomes a form of trade, right? And if we go all the way back, right, here, when I said that this was the second most important thing, right? Now, because of these bare bones of trade, we can kind of understand why that is a little bit, right? Let's get back. Yeah. And why that is so mutually beneficial. And we're going to leave it there for now.